Characters to profile. Louise Bennett, maternity ward nurse. Protagonist who finds the triplets. Triplets, 3 identical babies. Newborns abandoned in baskets in the parking lot. Character, Louise Bennett. Core, identity, permanent visual anchors. Gender, female. Age, adult, 30-40 years old, not specified in the text. Range inferred from professional context. Ethnicity, Canadian, inferred from name and Montreal setting, not explicitly stated in the text. Facial structure, no explicit facial details in the text. Script emphasizes emotional expression. Worried, determined eyes when discovering the babies. Body, average build, adult woman. No explicit physical description beyond being a nurse. Hair, not specified in the text. Skin, not specified in the text. Assumed fair light tone possible from francophone context, but not stated. Distinctive marks, no scars, marks, permanent features mentioned. Outfit layers, primary outfit. Functional maternity ward nurse attire. Uniform, practical scrubs or lab coat with badge. With outer winter clothing when going to the parking lot. Winter coat. Outfit changes. Single scene opening. Work uniform transitioning to winter coat when going outside. Grooming. Practical and functional. At end of shift, focused on action. No emphasis on makeup or style. Expressive baseline. Resting expression. Tendency toward worried and determined expression. Compassion and urgency when finding the babies. Body language. Quick, decisive movements. Racing through the ward, slipping on snow, hands trembling while carefully lifting the newborns, visibly nervous yet resolute. Visual consistency anchors. Top 5 traits for cross-generation consistency. To adult nurse, maternity ward, in uniform with badge 2, Canadian, name, setting. Used as cultural visual undertone, clothing and subtle. Features, trace winter. Coat over uniform when going to parking lot, snow context. 4, trembling hands when holding the newborns. Recurring gesture in this scene. Compassionate and determined expression. Worried eyes. Urgent posture. Script fidelity notes. Avoided inventing facial details, hair color, or exact age beyond inferred range. Items like uniform and coat are reasonable inferences from role/action. Nurse, shift ending. Outdoor scene in snow. Character, triplets, 3 identical babies. Core, identity, permanent visual. Anchors, gender, male. All 3 are boys. Age, years old. Newborns, just hours old. Ethnicity, not specified. Facial structure. Identical appearance among the 3, identical twins. Newborn features, fine, sparse hair. Newborn characteristics, no unique marks described. Body, newborn body, very small, weakened by cold, wrapped in thin blankets. Hair, newborn hair, very short, fine, not detailed in the text. Skin, newborn skin. Text emphasizes exposure to cold, blankets too thin. Distinctive permanent features. Identical to each other. Indistinguishable appearance. 3 identical newborns. Wrapped in threadbare blankets inside wicker picnic baskets. Crying inconsolably. A persistent expression of profound distress. Outfit layers. Primary outfit. Wrapped in thin blankets, no proper clothing described. Placement, prop. Each infant nestled inside a picnic-style wicker basket. Abandoned on the snow-blanketed parking lot. Expressive baseline. Resting expression. Crying desperate. Continuous crying. Body language. Typical newborn crying movements. Small fists recoiling from cold visual consistency anchors. Top 5 traits for cross-generation consistency. 3 identical newborns. Identical twins. Visually indistinguishable. Each wrapped in blankets too thin for the cold. 3 inside picnic-style wicker baskets. Key setting. 4 crying desperate. Facial expression and sound. Abandoned outdoors. On snow, baby cold contrast is visually striking. Quality and limitations. Profile strictly based on the text, where the script provides no physical traits. Hair color, eyes, marks, height, exact age. I maintained not specified or used minimal inferences explicitly marked as inferred. For example, nurse uniform, winter coat, adult age range. Main anchors prioritize permanent and visually distinctive items that ensure consistency. Uniform seals badge and hand gesture for Louise. Identical trio plus wicker baskets, plus thin blankets, plus snow for the babies. It's an output. Ready for injection into image generation. Prompts. Video title. 3 babies, 1 letter, characters. Name. Louise Bennett, visual descriptor. Female, 30-40 years old, Canadian. Fair skin, not explicitly stated. Compassionate, determined expression. Unspecified hair. Average build. Wearing maternity ward nurse uniform with badge and winter coat. They name. Triplets. Visual descriptor. Male, 0 years old, unspecified ethnicity. Newborn skin tone, pink, exposed to cold. 3 identical newborn faces, identical triplets. Sparse newborn hair, tiny fragile newborn build. Wrapped in thin blankets inside wicker picnic baskets in snow. Final note. If desired, I can refine image generation profiles for specific AI platforms. Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. Adding style tags, lighting, angle, and conservative negative prompts while preserving these visual anchors. But something paralyzes her. An instinct, as if opening that envelope would cross a line that couldn't be undone. She takes the 3 babies inside. The medical team acts quickly. The boys are dehydrated, hypothermic, but alive. Miraculously alive. While the doctors work to stabilize them, Louise finally finds the courage to open the letter. Her hands tremble as she tears open the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Cursive handwriting, elegant, almost aristocratic. And the first words are like a punch to the stomach. You are holding a mistake that cost millions. Louise reads in silence, and with each word her face grows paler. She reads once, twice, 3 times. Then, with a quick movement that surprises even herself, she folds the letter and tucks it into her uniform pocket. She doesn't show it to anyone. She doesn't speak about its contents. She just keeps that secret as if it were poison. Because that's exactly what the letter is. Pure poison. Let's pause here, because you need to understand something crucial about that December night. Those 3 babies weren't abandoned out of desperation, poverty, or by a panicked teenage mother. No. Those babies were discarded as evidence, like chess pieces that needed to be removed from the board. And the person responsible? A man who built a $3 billion empire on a foundation of buried secrets. Louise Bennett makes a decision that night. She won't turn the letter over to the authorities. Not yet. Because the words on that paper don't just speak of abandonment. They speak of something much bigger. Imagine holding a secret so powerful it could bring down an entire empire. It's like holding a grenade without the pin. You know it's about to detonate. The only questions are when and who will be caught in the blast. The letter mentions a name that, in 1985, was already synonymous with business success in Canada. A real estate tycoon who built his empire through ruthless deals, backroom agreements, and an unbreakable reputation of always emerging victorious. Let's call him by the name that appears in the letter, Richard Alderton. If you've never heard of him, don't worry. History made sure to bury him. But in 1985, Richard Alderton was untouchable, 39 years old, married to the heiress of a banking dynasty, father of 2 perfect daughters, owner of skyscrapers in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. The kind of man who appeared on business magazine covers with that smile of someone who's never known failure. And now, 3 abandoned babies in picnic baskets carried his DNA. The letter Louise kept in her pocket wasn't a cry for help. It was a cold, calculated confession, written by someone who knew every detail of what had happened. And more importantly, it was a threat to Richard Alderton. Because whoever wrote that letter knew exactly what they were doing by leaving it with a nurse at the hospital. They were planting a time bomb. Louise stays at the hospital until dawn. The triplets are transferred to the neonatal ICU. They're lucky, the doctors say. Another half hour in the cold and they wouldn't have survived. But Louise can't feel relief, because she knows what the letter says. She knows those babies aren't just anonymous orphans. They're heirs. Heirs to an empire they'll never be allowed to claim. In the following days, Louise tries to act normally. She goes to work. She cares for the triplets, who begin to gain weight and respond well to treatment. But every time she looks at those 3 identical faces, she feels the weight of the letter burning in her pocket. She needs to make a decision. 3 options present themselves before her, each more dangerous than the last. First option, turn the letter over to the police, expose Richard Alderton, and face the fury of a billionaire who has infinite resources to destroy anyone who challenges him. Second option, burn the letter, pretend it never existed, allow the babies to be adopted by ordinary families, and carry that secret to the grave. Third option, keep the letter, wait, see what happens. Hold on to that evidence as a weapon that perhaps, one day, will be necessary. Louise chooses the third option, and for 20 years, that letter stays hidden, kept in a safe in Louise's apartment. untouched, but never forgotten. Meanwhile, the triplets are adopted, not together, because adoption protocol rarely allows siblings to stay united, especially triplets. They are separated. 3 identical babies sent to 3 different families in 3 different cities. Consider the complexity. 3 identical faces scattered across completely different worlds like seeds, from the same fruit planted in opposing soils. They grow up oblivious. No knowledge of their brothers. No understanding of their origins. Unaware they are the unacknowledged sons of one of Canada's most powerful men. Michael grows up in Ottawa with a middle-class family. He becomes a history teacher, the man who teaches others about truths of the past, without knowing the truth of his own past. Daniel grows up in Quebec City within a deeply religious family. He becomes a nurse, dedicating his life to caring for strangers, entirely unaware that 2 identical brothers were breathing the same Canadian air. Thomas grows up in Toronto within an immigrant family. He becomes a corporate lawyer, defending multinational companies, never imagining that his own biological father had built an empire he would ultimately confront. 3 utterly different lives, 3 separate identities. Yet DNA knows no boundaries, and blood will always find its way home. In 2005, 20 years after that winter night, Louise Bennett receives a devastating diagnosis: terminal cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less, and suddenly, that letter kept in the safe becomes a responsibility she can no longer carry alone. Because Louise knows something the original letter writer in 1985 did not. Richard Alderton hadn't merely abandoned those babies. Someone deliberately wanted this truth revealed, and they had specifically chosen Louise to safeguard this secret. Now, with death approaching, Louise must decide what to do with the time bomb she's kept for 2 decades. Will she burn the letter and take the secret to her grave? Or will she finally detonate the truth and let the triplets discover who they really are? The answer unfolds on a somber April afternoon, as Louise makes 3 fateful phone calls. 3 men, strangers to one another and living entirely separate lives, would simultaneously receive identical messages from a retired nurse they'd never known. The message was succinct, direct, impossible to dismiss. You have 2 identical brothers you never knew existed, and the man who abandoned you built an empire worth $3 billion. But the complete contents of the letter? The devastating details that Louise kept for 20 years? That would remain hidden for a while longer, until the triplets were ready. Until they could face the truth of who Richard Alderton was. And more importantly, until they could understand why someone wanted that truth to come to light. And what these 3 men discovered when they finally met would change everything. Because Richard Alderton wasn't just hiding abandoned children. He was hiding something much worse. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's return to that crucial moment in 2005, when everything began to fall apart. 25 years. 25 long years separated those 3 babies abandoned at the Montreal hospital from the 3 phone calls that Louise Bennett made that fall afternoon in 2005. 3 calls, 3 adult men, 3 lives that were about to collide in a way no one could imagine. Michael Alderton was 35 years old when his phone rang. A history professor in Ottawa, he lived in a modest house with his wife and 2 children. A calm man, with reading glasses always hanging around his neck. Michael spent weekends grading papers and planning lessons about French colonization in Canada. His life was predictable, safe, or at least it was until that phone call. The voice on the other end of the line trembled. My name is Louise Bennett. I was a nurse at Montreal General Hospital for 40 years, and I need to tell you something I've kept for too long. Michael sat down slowly, his heart racing without understanding why. You have 2 identical brothers, triplets. You were abandoned as babies, and the man who left you behind, he built a $3 billion empire. The silence that followed was so profound that Louise thought the call had dropped. But then Michael whispered, "This doesn't make sense. My parents adopted me when I was 6 months old. They never mentioned brothers." "Because no one knew," Louise replied, her voice breaking. "I separated you, 3 different families. I thought I was giving you a chance, but I've carried this secret like a stone in my chest for 25 years. And now, with the time I have left..." She paused, and Michael heard a muffled sob. "You deserve to know the truth." The second call was to Daniel Alderton, a nurse in Quebec City. At 35, Daniel spent his days caring for terminal patients in a palliative care ward. A man with gentle hands and a compassionate gaze. He had learned early on that life was fragile, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to hear. When Louise identified herself and began talking about abandoned triplets, Daniel felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the hospital corridor wall, still wearing his teal uniform, and listened in silence as his entire reality crumbled. "You have 2 brothers," Louise repeated. "Michael and Thomas, and the man who should have been your father. He left you as if you were worthless. Meanwhile, he built one of the largest real estate empires in Canada. Why are you telling me this now?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Because I'm dying, Louise replied simply. Terminal cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. And I can't take this secret to my grave. You deserve to know each other. You deserve to know where you came from. The third call was the hardest. Thomas Alderton was a corporate lawyer in Toronto, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. A man of impeccable suits and sharp ambition, he had built his career defending large companies. When Louise called, he was in the office, reviewing contracts for a $20 million deal. Mr. Alderton, my name is Louise Bennett, and I need to talk about the day you were born. Thomas frowned. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't know who you are, but I'm busy. You have 2 identical twin brothers, Louise said quickly before he could hang up. You were all abandoned at Montreal General Hospital in 1985. I was the nurse who found you, and I kept a letter left by the woman who brought you in. A letter that mentions your biological father's name. Thomas froze. My biological father, Richard Alderton, a real estate billionaire. And before you ask, yes, that's really your birth surname. The families who adopted you all kept the name that was on the birth certificates. 3 weeks later, in a cafe in Montreal, 3 identical men met for the first time since they were babies. The scene was surreal. Michael arrived first, nervous, fidgeting with a paper napkin. Daniel walked in seconds later and stopped at the entrance, frozen at the sight of his own face sitting at the table. And when Thomas appeared, in a gray suit with a leather briefcase, all 3 just stood there, looking at each other in absolute silence. A waiter passed by and did a double take. Wow, are you guys triplets? Apparently so, Thomas replied, his voice tense. They sat down. They ordered coffee that no one drank. And then slowly they began to compare their lives. Michael, the calm professor from Ottawa. Daniel, the compassionate nurse from Quebec City. Thomas, the ambitious lawyer from Toronto. 3 men raised in different cities by different families, with different professions, but all carrying the same face, the same voice, the same unconscious gesture of running their hand through their hair when nervous. Louise gave me this, Michael said, pulling a yellowed envelope from his backpack. The letter that was left with us when we were babies. All 3 leaned forward. The letter was handwritten, in shaky handwriting, and it began like this. To whom it may concern. These 3 boys were born on March 15th, 1985. Their names are Michael, Daniel, and Thomas. Their father's name is Richard Alderton. Thomas picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Richard Alderton. I know that name. You do? Daniel asked. It's impossible not to know if you work in corporate law. Alderton Properties, one of the largest real estate developers in Canada. He owns half of downtown Toronto, and Vancouver, and Calgary. Thomas paused, his face pale. The man must be worth $3 billion. And he left us in a hospital like garbage, Michael said, his voice low but hard. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel looked at the letter again. There's more. Louise said the letter continues, that there's a final paragraph she didn't want to read over the phone. Michael turned the paper over. And there, in the next lines, it read, Richard Alderton must never know they exist. He is married. His wife cannot have children, and he told me that if I told anyone about the babies, he would destroy my life. I would rather leave them here, anonymous, than see them grow up in the shadow of a man who hates them for existing. The 3 men sat in silence for long minutes. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice controlled but with cold anger underneath. So he knew. He knew we existed and abandoned us anyway, because we were inconvenient. He had a wife who couldn't have children, Daniel murmured softly. And instead of adopting us, he simply discarded us, Michael finished, his tone bitter. It was Thomas who suggested the next step. We need to know more about him. Who is Richard Alderton beyond a name on a letter and a real estate empire? Is he still married? Does he have other children? Is he still alive? In the days that followed, the 3 became detectives of their own origin, and the obsession took over their lives. Michael spent sleepless nights at the Ottawa Library, scouring microfilm of old newspapers. He searched for any mention of Richard Alderton in the 1980s. His wife began to worry when she found him at 3 in the morning, surrounded by papers, his red eyes fixed on yellowed articles. You need to stop, she said gently. But how could he stop searching for the phantom that had defined his entire existence? Each article Michael uncovered was like peeling back another layer of an enigmatic Russian doll, and with each layer, more secrets emerged. Daniel used his contacts in the hospital system to track down old records. It wasn't exactly legal, and he knew it, but the need to know outweighed any scruples. He found the birth records. 3 healthy babies. Perfect weight. Daniel leveraged his hospital contacts to uncover old records. It wasn't strictly legal, but his desperate need for answers trumped any moral reservations. He located the birth records. 3 healthy babies. Perfect weight. The delivery notes showed no complications. A single handwritten note sent a chill down his spine. Mother refused to see the babies. Immediate adoption requested. Those words haunted Daniel for days. Refused to see, as if they were an unbearable mistake, something too painful to acknowledge. Thomas plunged into Richard Alderton's corporate empire with surgical precision. He wielded access to databases that existed only in the shadows of most people's awareness. What he uncovered was a meticulously crafted narrative of success, power, and influence. But Thomas knew a fundamental truth from his courtroom years. The most polished facades invariably conceal the deepest fissures, and these fissures were telling. Subtle inconsistencies peppered the early years of the Alderton Empire businesses, materializing from nowhere. Partners vanishing without a trace. They spoke to each other every day. Conference calls that lasted hours, sharing discoveries, piecing together the puzzle of a life that should have been theirs. And what they discovered was shocking. Richard Alderton was 62 years old, still married to the same woman, Margaret, who indeed never had children. The couple was known in elite circles for their donations to fertility and adoption causes. Imagine the scene. A man donating millions to help couples have children, appearing at charity galas with emotional speeches about the value of family. While 3 biological children grew up as orphans on the other side of the country, he donates millions to help infertile couples, Daniel said during the conference call, his voice raw with disbelief. All while he abandoned 3 healthy babies. It gets worse, Thomas added grimly. I found an interview from 1998 where he claims, and I quote, "My biggest regret is never having had children. Margaret and I would have been wonderful parents." A leaden silence descended. No words could adequately capture the soul-crushing agony of hearing your biological father publicly mourn his childlessness when you not only exist, but were callously discarded. Michael felt a surge of nausea. His mind drifted to his own children, the nightly embraces, the pride in watching his 7-year-old son master the multiplication table, the overwhelming emotion when he first held his newborn daughter, silently vowing never to repeat his own father's betrayal. The universal wound of the abandoned child burned within him. What was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father couldn't love me? He's fabricating an entire life, Michael finally said, his voice fracturing, constructing this image of a frustrated family man while discarding us as if we were nothing more than inconvenient footnotes. Daniel remained silent, lost in thought. He was on his hospital night shift, watching a newborn sleep peacefully in the incubator. Recently discharged parents had left, exhausted but glowing with joy, and Daniel understood with painful clarity. This was their stolen inheritance. That first moment, that first touch, that fundamental certainty of being wanted. 3 decades of absence and emptiness no amount of money could ever restore. "There's more," Thomas said, his voice brittle with tension. "I found photographs, charity events, lavish galas, always positioned beside Margaret, always wearing that practiced smile. And do you know what's most chilling? He looks like us, the eyes, the precise contours of the face. When I look at you two, I see my own reflection. And when I gaze at Richard Alderton, he trailed off. I see the exact same features. The anger brewing among them wasn't a wild, uncontrolled blaze. Instead, it was glacial, methodical, the precise, surgical rage that emerges when you comprehend that your entire existence was merely an inconvenient detail in someone else's meticulously curated life story. They had been discarded not through desperation or true necessity, but through cold, calculated convenience. Because 3 babies simply did not align with the pristine narrative of a billionaire and his supposedly barren wife. But there was still one unsolved mystery. The woman who took the babies to the hospital. The letter said, "He told me he would destroy my life if I told." Who was she? The biological mother? A mistress? An employee forced into silence? Louise, when they visited her a few weeks later, was visibly weaker. The cancer was advancing rapidly, but her eyes lit up when she saw the 3 identical men enter the hospital room. "You found each other," she whispered, smiling. "We did," Michael replied, pulling up a chair. "But we need to know more. The woman who left us at the hospital. Do you remember her?" Louise closed her eyes, the memory coming back through the years. She was young, maybe 25, 26 years old, pretty, but with frightened eyes. Said she worked for Richard Alderton, not as an office employee, as a personal assistant. "You know what that means." "A mistress," Thomas said emotionlessly. "Probably." She was terrified, kept looking over her shoulder, as if someone was going to appear. "Left you with me, handed me the letter, and disappeared. Never saw her again." "And her name?" Daniel asked. Louise hesitated, then with effort whispered, "Catherine." She said her name was Catherine. The 3 brothers exchanged glances. Now they had a name. Catherine, a young woman who worked for Richard Alderton 30 years. Ago and carried Triplets to a hospital to abandon them under orders from a billionaire who wanted to keep his reputation untarnished. But there's something more, Louise said, her voice faltering. Something that's not in the letter because it was too shameful to write. The three leaned forward. Catherine didn't want to leave you. She cried so much I thought she would faint. She said Richard threatened not only to destroy her, but... Louise swallowed hard, but to make sure she never saw any of you again. That he had enough power to ensure the babies would disappear completely if she didn't cooperate. So she brought them to me, asked me to find good families, and broke her heart into 3 pieces in that hallway. The silence that followed was absolute, because there's a difference between being abandoned and being used as bargaining chips. Catherine had no choice. It was obey or lose everything, including the last chance to know her children would be safe. Daniel had tears in his eyes. Michael clenched his fists. And Thomas, the lawyer accustomed to cold negotiations and emotionless contracts, felt something burning in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Outrage. Not just about the way they were abandoned, but about the woman who was forced to do it. About the nurse who carried the secret for decades. About the lives that could have been different if Richard Alderton had made the right choice. He will know, Thomas said, his voice low but firm. Richard Alderton will know we exist, and he'll have to look us in the eyes and explain why he discarded us as if we were a mistake. But what the 3 brothers didn't know yet was that confronting Richard Alderton would be just the beginning. Because Louise had kept one last secret. A secret so devastating that she would take it to the grave, unless they really decided to see it through. And then, Michael asked, "What do we do after he knows?" Thomas smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Then we'll find out what else he's hiding. Because men like Richard Alderton never commit just one sin. And I have a feeling our abandonment is just the tip of the iceberg. Louise passed away 3 weeks later. But before her final breath, she entrusted them with one last crucial piece of information. "There's more to the letter," she whispered during their final meeting. A final paragraph I withheld when I first showed it to you. Catherine made me promise it would only be revealed if you truly decided to confront Richard. "Why?" Michael asked. "Because what's written there isn't just about your abandonment. It's about something Richard Alderton did. Something so serious, so criminal, that Catherine was certain he would kill her if he knew she had documented it." The 3 brothers looked at each other. The weight of those words was almost physical. "Where is this paragraph?" Thomas asked, his lawyer's voice taking control. "In a sealed envelope, at the bank. Safe deposit box number 247, First National Bank of Montreal. The key." Louise pulled a small silver key from under her pillow. "Is here. But before you open it, you need to be sure, because what's on that paper could completely destroy Richard Alderton, or destroy you if he finds out you know." Michael took the key. The metal was warm in his palm, as if it carried the weight of decades of secrets. It felt like holding the key to a door that might be better left unopened, a threshold between knowing and unknowing. "What did he do, Louise?" Daniel asked softly. Louise closed her eyes. A tear ran down her wrinkled face. Catherine never told me the details, but she said she witnessed something terrible. Something involving money, power, and people who disappeared. And that Richard Alderton was responsible. People who disappeared. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. 3 days after Louise's funeral, the 3 brothers stood at the door of the First National Bank of Montreal. The key burned in Michael's pocket. None of them had slept properly since the last conversation with the nurse. "Are we sure about this?" Daniel asked. "Once we know, there's no going back. Pause and consider this moment." 3 men standing before a bank door. The complete truth about their origins just inches away. On the other side lay answers to questions that had haunted them for years. But truth has a price. And sometimes that price is shattering the delicate illusion of what might have been. "He abandoned us," Michael replied. "Threatened our biological mother. Built an empire while denying our existence." "Yes, I'm sure." They went in. The interior of the bank was silent, almost reverent. The manager led them through narrow corridors to the vault room in the basement. Fluorescent lights hummed softly. Hundreds of small metal doors guarded secrets from lives they would never know. Box 247 was in the lower left corner. The key turned smoothly. Inside, a single yellowed envelope. The truth about Richard Alderton. Michael picked up the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy. There was something inside besides paper. They requested a private room. Door closed. Curtains drawn. Just the 3 brothers and a 30-year-old secret. Michael opened the envelope. Inside were 3 handwritten pages, an old photograph, and a small cassette tape recorder from the 1980s. The photograph showed a young Richard Alderton, the same eyes Michael saw in the mirror. The same jawline as Daniel, the same smile as Thomas. And beside him a woman holding 3 babies. "Catherine," Daniel whispered. "Our mother." Michael picked up the handwritten pages with trembling hands. The handwriting was delicate but firm, as if each word had been carefully considered. He began to read aloud. My name is Catherine Marie Bradford. I'm 26 years old, and I'm writing this because I'm certain I won't survive much longer. Richard Alderton is a powerful man, and men like him, men with secrets, don't allow witnesses to live. The three exchanged glances, their hearts racing. Michael continued. I worked as Richard's personal assistant for 3 years. I started as a secretary, but quickly became something more. He told me he loved me, that he would leave his wife, that we would build a life together. I believed him. Text. And when I discovered I was pregnant with triplets, Michael's voice failed. Thomas took the paper and continued. When I told Richard about the babies, something in him changed. His eyes went cold. He told me I had 2 options. Make the babies disappear permanently, or give them up for adoption, and never mention their existence again. If I chose to keep the babies, if I told anyone they were his, he would ensure I spent the rest of my life in misery. And then, Thomas paused, his blood running cold. Then he showed me what happened to people who defied him. Daniel picked up the last page with trembling hands, and when he read the final words, when he understood what Catherine had witnessed, his voice came out in a whisper. In March 1984, a year before you were born, I was in Richard's office late at night when I heard raised voices. His business partner, Martin Chen, was threatening to expose financial irregularities. Richard was calm, dangerously calm. He said something I'll never forget. Problems disappear, Martin. You'd do well to remember that. 3 days later, Martin Chen vanished without a trace, and Richard seized his company's share with cold, calculated efficiency. The silence that followed was absolute. She's accusing him of... Michael couldn't finish the sentence. Murder, Thomas completed, voice tense. She's accusing Richard Alderton of murder. And there, in the small cassette tape recorder that had waited 30 years to be heard, was the proof. A secretly recorded conversation. Richard Alderton's voice, cold and calculating, planning the disappearance of a man who knew too much. Imagine safeguarding a recording for 3 decades, knowing it could vanish at any moment, destroyed, lost, or intercepted. Catherine had transformed that cassette tape into an ironclad insurance policy. If anything happened to her, the truth would endure. Because the final paragraph of her letter contained a secret so heinous, so criminally damning, that it would shatter everything. Not just revealing who Richard Alderton truly was, but exposing the monstrous depths to which a powerful man would sink to protect his dark secrets. And now, 3 children he abandoned 30 years ago held in their hands the power to completely destroy the empire he built on lies, threats, and possibly blood. Michael, the teacher who always taught his students about the importance of truth. Daniel, the nurse who dedicated his nights caring for strangers. Thomas, the lawyer who fought for justice for others. All of them, about to discover why they were abandoned on that cold January day in 1985. But there's another secret that Louise kept. A final paragraph that would change everything. Louise opened the yellowed envelope with trembling hands. Her eyes, moist with tears held back for 2 decades, met Michael's first. You deserve to know everything, she whispered. Every word of this letter. Every shameful secret this man tried to bury with money and silence. The letter had 3 pages. Letterhead paper with the Alderton Properties logo. That empire of skyscrapers and luxury condominiums that dominated Montreal's skyline. And in the typed lines, a confession that Richard Alderton never imagined would come to light. Michael began to read aloud, his steady teacher's voice trembling on the first words. To whoever finds these children, my name is Richard Alderton, and I have committed the most horrible sin a man can commit. Not against the law, but against humanity itself. Thomas leaned forward. Daniel held his breath. In 1984, I had everything. A real estate empire valued at $300 million. Buildings in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. My name in business newspapers. Respect, power. But there was a void that money couldn't fill. Michael's voice began to break, but he continued. I met Elizabeth Marchant when she came to work as project manager at my company. She was brilliant, dedicated, 20 years younger than me, and unlike my wife, who had become merely a decorative piece at social events, Elizabeth saw me as a man, not as a wallet. Louise closed her eyes. She already knew this part. But for the triplets, each word was a painful revelation. We started a relationship. Secret, of course. My reputation as a respectable real estate mogul couldn't be tarnished by a scandal of an affair with an employee. But I loved her. For the first time in decades, I felt something real. Daniel clenched his fists. The story was taking shape, and he could already feel the weight of betrayal approaching. When Elizabeth told me she was pregnant, I panicked. Not because of the pregnancy itself, but because of what the doctors confirmed in the first ultrasounds. Triplets. 3 babies. Michael stopped. He looked at his brothers. 3 babies, them. My wife couldn't have children. That was public knowledge in our social circles. If I showed up with 3 babies, questions would come. The truth would emerge. And with the truth would come ruin. The next part of the letter made Thomas rise abruptly from his chair. Because you see, my empire wasn't built only on steel and concrete. It was built on fraud. Municipal contracts obtained through bribery. Building permits secured with payoffs to inspectors. Bank loans guaranteed with falsified documents. I wasn't just a successful businessman. I was a white-collar criminal operating in broad daylight, protected by an impeccable reputation. The shameful truth was emerging, word by word. Elizabeth found out. She discovered the documents in my office, the secret payments, the fake invoices, the offshore accounts, and she gave me an ultimatum. Acknowledge your children publicly, or she would take everything to the authorities. Louise opened her eyes and looked at the 3 men. They were paralyzed, absorbing each revelation. I had 2 choices. Lose everything and go to prison, or make Elizabeth disappear. And God forgive me, I chose the second option. Michael felt nausea rising. Daniel began to cry silently. Thomas, the lawyer, was already mentally assembling the criminal case. I paid $500,000 to 2 men. Not to kill Elizabeth, I'm not a murderer, but to make her disappear permanently. They were supposed to take her to the Quebec countryside, promising a new identity, a new life, with enough money to raise the children far from Montreal. Louise whispered, but she never got there. The men I hired betrayed her. They took my money, and then demanded another $1 million under threat of exposing everything. When I refused, they hurt her. Badly. And disappeared, taking the initial payment and leaving Elizabeth in a rural hospital, unconscious, without identification. The letter trembled in Michael's hands. As for the babies, born prematurely during the escape, the men abandoned them in Montreal. 3 innocent children, left in the cold because their existence was inconvenient for a coward billionaire. Richard Alderton had written that letter and placed it with the babies, thinking it would be discarded or ignored. He never imagined that Louise Bennett, a nurse with a sense of justice, would keep it as evidence. If you're reading this, it means you survived. Michael, Daniel, and Thomas, the names Elizabeth chose for my 3 children. You deserve to know that your father is a coward who prioritized money and reputation over love and responsibility, and that your mother, Elizabeth, loved you with her entire being until her last conscious moment. Louise completed the story with a steady voice. Elizabeth died 6 months later in the hospital. Brain hemorrhage caused by her injuries. She never regained consciousness to say your names or look for you. The silence that followed was devastating. But then, something changed in Thomas's eyes. Something transformed shock into determination. He confessed everything, Thomas said, holding the letter. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy, child abandonment. This here is enough evidence to destroy him completely. Daniel wiped away his tears. 25 years. He lived 25 years free, wealthy, respected, while our mother died alone and we grew up not knowing who we were. Michael, the teacher who always taught about consequences, smiled bitterly. But now we know. And now he's going to pay. In the following 6 months, Richard Alderton's fall was spectacular. The confession letter triggered an immediate federal investigation. And here's the brutal truth about justice. When an empire is built on lies, it takes only one truth to bring it all down. It's like removing the wrong piece from a Jenga tower. Everything else collapses. Thomas, using his law license, took the letter directly to the Quebec Public Prosecutor's office. The investigation that followed was brutal. Federal auditors combed through every contract of Alderton Properties since 1980. Inspectors who had received bribes, now retired and with immunity, testified. Offshore accounts were frozen. Falsified documents were exposed. And the media loved every second, because there's nothing the public enjoys more than watching a king fall from his throne. Real estate tycoon accused of $1 million fraud and abandonment of triplet children, blared the headlines. Photos of Michael, Daniel, and Thomas appeared alongside the photo of Richard Alderton being led in handcuffs from his 47th floor office. The contrast was brutal. 3 honest men, hard-working, dedicated to helping others, versus a billionaire who built his empire on lies and betrayal. Alderton tried to deny it, then tried to justify it. Finally, confronted with the letter in his own handwriting and confirmed handwriting analysis, he collapsed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Michael, Daniel, and Thomas sat in the front row every day. They watched the man who abandoned them try to buy his freedom with expensive lawyers. They saw him plead for clemency. And then came the moment they had waited 30 years to witness. Richard Alderton, standing in court, looked directly at the 3 identical sons he had discarded, and for the first time said, "I'm sorry." But some words come too late, like trying to put out a fire after the house has already turned to ashes. Richard Alderton was sentenced to 12 years in prison for tax fraud, bribery of public officials, and document falsification. The charge of child abandonment was added, adding 2 more years. At 68 years old, he would enter prison and probably die there. His empire was dismantled. $300 million evaporated in fines, restitution, and legal fees. The buildings bearing his name were renamed. His wife, who genuinely knew nothing, divorced him and moved to Europe. And 3 men who had begun life abandoned in Montreal's cold finally found something money cannot buy: justice. But the true vindication came in an unexpected form. When Alderton's assets were liquidated to pay the fines, it was discovered that legally, as biological children recognized through court-ordered DNA testing, Michael, Daniel, and Thomas were entitled to a share of the inheritance before creditors. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant. $2 million split 3 ways, roughly $666,000 each. Michael used his share to create an educational foundation for children in foster care. Every child deserves to know their worth, he told reporters, regardless of how their life began. Daniel invested in a free clinic in Montreal's low-income neighborhoods. Caring for those abandoned by society is my purpose, he explained. Thomas opened a pro bono law practice, defending people who couldn't afford justice free of charge. The law should serve everyone, not just the wealthy, became his motto. 3 men, 3 paths, 1 story of redemption. Louise Bennett, at 72, was honored by the city of Montreal for her courage in preserving the truth for 2 decades. I always knew that letter had a purpose, she said at the event, with Michael, Daniel, and Thomas by her side. Some truths need time to emerge, but when they do, they transform everything. And transform it did. Today, when you pass by the buildings that once belonged to Richard Alderton, you see plaques with new names. Some honor Elizabeth Marchant, the mother they never knew but who loved them enough to give them names. Others celebrate Louise Bennett, the nurse who preserved the truth when it would have been easier to discard it. Michael, Daniel, and Thomas still meet every January. On the anniversary of the day they were found, they visit the exact location where they were abandoned, now marked with a plaque that reads, "Sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the coldest beginnings." Their story reveals a fundamental truth about justice, truth, and redemption. The shame one man seeks to conceal ultimately becomes the catalyst for others' vindication. Richard Alderton tried to bury 3 inconvenient babies in a shameful secret. Instead, he created 3 extraordinary men whose existence exposed his true nature. And in the end, it wasn't the billionaire with his $300 million empire who prevailed. It was 3 brothers who began life with nothing but each other, and discovered that was all they needed. Because family isn't about blood or money. It's about who stays when everything falls apart. It's about who preserves the truth when it would be easier to lie. It's about transforming abandonment into purpose, pain into justice, shame into vindication. This is the story of Michael, Daniel, and Thomas Marchant. 3 names chosen by a mother they never knew. 3 lives saved by a nurse who refused to forget. 3 men who proved that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us, but living so well that our very existence becomes proof that they failed. You saw how 3 babies abandoned in Montreal's cold transformed shame into vindication. You saw how a single letter kept for 20 years dismantled a $300 million empire. And you saw that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. If this story resonated with you, perhaps because you understand the weight of an untold truth, leave your like. Each like is a reminder that such stories matter.